Hello and welcome once again to In the Dugout, your home of the beautiful game. My name is Josh and this is the Dugout Debate. We've got a new look, a new logo and brand new features. But what hasn't changed is our lineup. And as always, I'm joined by my fellow presenters, partisans and pundits, Chris and Alex. But we aren't going to quite kick off as we usually do, because Friday did see the sad news of Sunderland superfan Bradley Lowry losing his brave battle with neuroblastoma. And we just want to wish his family well and hope that Bradley rests in peace and is up there smiling with the angels. As always on the Dugout Debate, we're kicking off with our picture of the week in a round called Picture This. And this week's picture involves Alexandre Lacazette. But lads, what's going on here?
I'll kick this one off. Is it, did someone ask him what position Arsenal are really hoping to achieve this season?
See, I went on a similar vein. I said, is he showing what position they finished in last season?
Great mind. Or is it, instead of him, waving and saying hello to reporters, is he waving goodbye to any trophy prospect he might have had?
Bar the FA Cup, maybe.
Shut up, Chris.
Is he showing how many goalkeepers Diane Abbott thinks make the starting 11?
There's always one. There's always one. Thing is, so there's something that struck me about this picture, and that's the fact that his face looks quite pained, and it also appears to me that he's got his polo shirt buttoned up all the way to the top. So is he possibly, realising that he signed for the wrong London team and trying to strangle himself with his unnaturally high-buttoned polo shirt?
Or is he just showing how many cigarettes an average French child smokes in about an hour?
Yes.
Fair. Accurate social commentary from Chris, as always.
Any advance on the actual answer?
I'm guessing he's just saying hello to reporters after arriving at Arsenal.
Yes, it is, of course, Alexandre Lacazette completing his medical ahead of his £50 million transfer from Lyon to Arsenal. But, Chris, obviously, Lyon's former striker is what Arsenal need at the moment. But is Arsenal the right destination for Lacazette at this moment in time? Is it the right step up in his career?
I feel it will depend a lot on how Wenger takes this season, because I feel that Arsenal, and particularly Wenger, need to go all out this season, because last season, of course, finishing fifth, as both Alex and I have just joked about, it really was particularly underwhelming. I mean, we've spoken in the past about how underwhelming Arsenal have been in recent years. So Wenger needs to go all out this season, not just for his own sort of reputation with the Arsenal fans, but also his job security. As for Lacazette, I feel like there were better clubs available to him, but perhaps they just weren't interested in him because, well, Chelsea, for one, have been trying to hold on to Costa as best they can, which has been to no avail. United now look like they're going to bring in Lukaku, so nearly every team is sort of gearing up their striking options for next season. So there was a lot of talk in the past about how Lacazette wanted to get to, or rather Arsenal wanted to sign Lacazette for a number of years, and now they've finally done it. So we'll just have to wait and see how he does.
Yeah. And Alex, where else do you think Arsenal need to strengthen this summer? Because they've not really lost any big names as such, but they've been falling short year on year in the league, and with rumours of Sanchez maybe going to Man City, is there any other positions where you think that they could bring in enforcements?
I think, well, first off, I think you've hit the nail on the head with the Lacazette transfer. I think that was possibly a move potentially in anticipation of them losing their most influential player, and in which case, I believe Sanchez is a better player than Lacazette anyway, so they're weakened in that position if Sanchez does leave. But I don't think the forward position was necessarily where they needed the most help. You've got a team that's trying to go realistically for league titles. That's their ambition. Who are still playing the likes of Coquelin in central defensive midfield. I don't think they have enough depth in defence. They lost a lot of players to injury last season and were having to rely on a very inexperienced Rob Holding, who did a fine job, but obviously is not Premier League winning quality. So I think similarly to a lot of teams, especially in the higher end of the league, Arsenal are very top heavy in comparison to the rest of their team, and I think that sorting out a couple of decent cover centre backs, perhaps one to start alongside Koscielny if Koscielny can remain fit for the whole season, and definitely a very solid central defensive mid, someone Matic-esque.
Yeah.
If they could possibly sign somebody of that quality, would be good.
Well, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that even if they signed Ronaldo and Messi, they still wouldn't win the league. But that's a story for another day.
Probably because Wenger would be playing Messi at right back.
But moving on and moving down a division to the Championship, and indeed to Chris's team, Aston Villa, with their marquee signing of the summer, John Terry, the former Blues captain, moving on a free transfer. Alex, Terry made it clear that playing for another Premier League team in opposition to Chelsea was out of the question. But why do you think that he decided to drop down a league as opposed to going abroad?
It's difficult to say. I think it indicates the kind of man and player Terry is in terms of his ambitions with football, because you see a lot of players, especially the sort of new players, being very driven by money. And I think it indicates to me that Terry is driven by something else. And it's no surprise that he's a massive leader on the pitch. He cares a lot about winning. And I think that this move is possibly to cement his legacy a little bit, because in terms of Premier League quality, you're talking about a man who's lifted the Premier League on more than one occasion and been an incredibly influential centre-back, one of the best centre-backs in Premier League history. And I think it would only cement his legacy as a defender if at a much older age, as a much more experienced defender, he was willing to move down a division and perhaps guide a team like Aston Villa, who are still a big club in English football, who have seemed to have lost their way. But if he can personally be a massive part of guiding them back to the Premier League, where many believe they belong because they are a big club in English history, then I really think that would cement his legacy as a huge player, a huge name in English football. And I think that's really what he's after.
And Chris, Alex did touch upon the experience that Terry will bring to Villa Park. But is his experience the only thing that he will bring to a very, should we say, underperforming Villa side, especially that has been underperforming in the last few seasons? Or is there another aspect of his game that will prove vital for Villa as they push for promotion?
Well, I feel like the experience, of course, will definitely help us to aim for promotion this year, which I feel like Villa, if they don't get promoted this season, there's no excuse really. He's a man who has won pretty much everything at English club level. He's won it all. Everything from League Cups to Champions Leagues, he's won it. So in terms of that, of course, the experience helps, but he's also, Alex touched upon it, he's a leader. And Villa, of course, last season we did sign two players who were trying to serve as leaders, those being Tommy Elphick from Bournemouth and Mile Jedinak from Crystal Palace. And they did a pretty decent job of trying to lead the side. But Terry is someone who's not only a leader on the pitch, but he's also a commanding figure in the dressing room. And I feel like he can definitely serve
and the bedroom.
Yeah, of course. I feel like he can definitely help to command some of the younger English players that Villa have in their dressing room, like the likes of Jack Grealish and Andre Green, even though they're not obviously in the same position. He can certainly help them to develop their mentalities as players. And I feel like I just want to sort of hit out at Birmingham for not getting him, despite offering him a better deal. It just shows the sort of how club stature can definitely help to influence players. If Villa in the Championship can still manage to bring John Terry into the side, that speaks massive volumes about the size of our club.
Well, two things I'll add to that. Firstly, I would say that the fact he's dropped to the Championship shows that it is the sort of the bigger picture he's interested in, not money. But second, I think you've done a massive disservice to former Villa and England centre-back Julian Lescott, who was on arrival to Villa Park, and
it's all right. He's rumoured to be going to Birmingham, so the Midlands trumpeting.
It's not our fault. We tweeted all the things we just said from our back pocket. It's not our fault. Like, it was a mistake. It's not an accident.
The back pocket is where Lescott ended up against pretty much every single other team.
So we're now moving on to our phrase of the week, which this week is, I've had to keep that a bit quiet. So I'll come to you first, Chris. What is that about?
Is this Adam Johnson on how he didn't know the age of consent?
Every week. We need some more original banter, guys.
I was waiting for that,
It's Devon.
that one day in the news we're going to wake up to see that Chris has actually become Adam Johnson.
Oh no. Is this possibly talking about Josh Talk, and his secret army of slaves he employs just to view his videos and keep refreshing them so they get significantly more views than all the rest of the stuff we put out on the channel?
Well, I have had to keep that a bit quiet, to be fair, so...
So that is the correct answer.
Yes.
Is this just BT Sport talking about Michael Owen? We had to keep that a bit quiet.
If only. Is that Harry Redknapp? To be fair, is that Harry Redknapp secretly admitting that he is, in fact, a fucking wheeler dealer?
Nico Crenshaw will soon be on his way to St Andrews.
As is customary.
I had to keep that a bit quiet. Is this Arsene Wenger talking about his sex tape?
I really thought I'd never have to have that mental image ever again.
The answer is actually when Les Reed went for the Southampton job, which
sake.
part of his childhood career did he leave out?
Just all of it.
Any advances on
Jesus.
the actual answer?
No, of course, that's Wayne Rooney talking about the fact that he used to kick about the house in Everton pyjamas whilst he was playing at Manchester United.
So yes, that was something that Wayne Rooney mentioned in an interview after being announced as an Everton player, after rejoining the club after 13 years at Manchester United. But something that I'm quite unsure about, and I'll come to you for this first, Chris. Where does Rooney fit into the Everton project? Because if he couldn't quite even break into the subs bench at times at Manchester United, where does he fit into an Everton squad that's clearly trying to improve their game?
I feel like he will either slot in somewhere in the midfield or he'll simply be serving as sort of as Zlatan figure at Man United last season, sort of a club hero or sort of influence on the younger players. Because, of course, he can't really play in the cam role because they've filled that in with David Klaassen. He could partner up top with Sandro as a striker, but I feel like he's just past it now to be in that sort of role. So it'll just be, well, Ronald Koeman has definitely signed him for a reason. And while Everton look to have been signing players sort of willy-nilly at the moment, but he wouldn't make a stupid signing if he didn't, well, he wouldn't bring in a player if he didn't think they could make the squad. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And Alex, do you think that Rooney still has a future with the England national team? Because obviously Gareth Southgate has essentially stripped him of the captaincy. He's dropped him. He's not picked him for the last however many games. So do you think that he will use this opportunity at Everton to rebuild his international career, or do you think that he's going to probably announce his retirement and just focus on Everton?
I think it's difficult to say. I think it depends on a number of things. If Everton in particular are doing very, very well, which is entirely possible, they are kind of, as Chris has mentioned, dark horses in terms of the transfers that they've made, then perhaps he will stop and focus on what is his boyhood team. But to be honest, I think I'm not entirely sure he has a choice in it. Whether he personally announces his retirement or not, I don't think he has a future in the England setup because, as we've seen over the last couple of seasons, he's lost that yard of pace that you always lose at that age. He's perhaps started to lose a bit of confidence, and he's just not quite the player he was 4 or 5 years ago. And in the England team at the moment, as much as we all joke about England having a rubbish team compared to what we've had before, in terms of the players that would fill any position that Rooney would possibly fill, we have plenty of players that I think are better suited to those positions than Rooney. In midfield, we've got Dele Alli, we've got Adam Lallana. Up front, we've got likes of Harry Kane, I don't see Rooney getting into that England team. And if I were him, I would personally just focus on club football. And I think considering he's joined his boyhood club, that's kind of him signifying almost a twilight of his career.
And moving from a team that's been in the Premier League since its beginning of its existence to a team that's just come into the Premier League for the first time, that's Huddersfield Town, who, amongst various signings that they have made, announced recently the signing of Tom Ince, son of former Premier League player Paul. But he's only 25 and he's with his 8th club. And last time he was in the Premier League was with Hull, and he hardly set the league alight. He scored a few goals and he went on loan to Derby before signing for them permanently. So Alex, why is this going to be different this time round?
I don't necessarily think it is going to be different. I think that he's a good player. I think that he has some talent. And I mean, we've seen him play. We saw him play at a younger age for sort of the England youth setups, and he always seemed to look quite promising there, but never quite fulfilled it. I'm not really sure why Huddersfield have signed him. I think they've made much more impressive signings, the likes of Jorgensen from Copenhagen, who I think is going to be a very good centre-back for them. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I would love to be really optimistic and go, yeah, he can, maybe do a Damari Gray or Nathan Redmond and actually be quite good for his club. But if I'm being completely honest, I think he'll be one of those players that is in the starting 11 week in, week out, and maybe just pop up with 5 or 6 goals. But is he going to do anything particularly special? I don't really think so.
I can't help but feel that he's like a less good Theo Walcott, really. Like he's 25, which is not particularly young, and he's still a prospect.
Yeah.
But moving on from Ince, but sticking with Huddersfield, Chris, out of the numerous other signings that they have made this season, who do you think is one to watch?
Well, Lavry already mentioned him. It's got to be Matthias Jorgensen from Copenhagen. And Lavry and I were speaking just before you came on. We just about how much of a monster he is. A 6'3" centre back who's he's quite terrifying, really. If I were any other team, I wouldn't want to be facing him and trying to get past him. So I feel like he would be one to watch. I'm just trying to think who else. Laurent Depoitre, who was, I believe, their first signing of the window. He was not too spectacular at his previous club. Where was it that they signed him from?
Was it Lyon?
I can't remember off the top of my head. But you do get players who just aren't necessarily fantastic elsewhere and then do end up proving themselves in the Premier League. So I would like to see that with Depoitre and Huddersfield, because I would like to see the Terriers do pretty well, because they've certainly got a manager who has proven himself as capable of setting up a team who, like we said previously, took them from the depths of despair and has now got them to the top flight for the first time in I think it was about 45 years. So yeah, I'd like to see Huddersfield do well.
Well, I highly doubt that is the end of their spending, but we'll see as the transfer window progresses. So we're rounding off, as always, the Dugout Debate with the Dugout Debate. And this week, with my ginormous plug my other series, Topical Team Sheets, with thousands of views. In reference to that, we are going to be discussing or debating this week the greatest foreign player to play for Chelsea in the Premier League. So,
me and Chris were literally sitting there before this, like, why has Josh actually picked this? It's a little bit out of the blue. Now it makes sense.
It's my time to shine, lads. Anyway,
just gonna say, there's also an episode of the Club Call covering Chelsea. So
yeah, if one person watched it, it'll double the views it's had. So make sure you give it anyway. As always, when I'm presenting, we'll have Chris and then Alex and then myself giving our picks before going into the debate as a whole. So Chris, who have you gone for?
Well, I feel like this was a bit of an obvious choice, even for me. I've gone for Ivorian striker Didier Drogba, who's pretty much just a legend at Chelsea, serving 9 years at Stamford Bridge, scoring a total of 164 goals in 381 games in all competitions, which works out to a goal every 2.3 games. He pretty much won it all with Chelsea. He won 4 league titles, 4 FA Cups, 3 League Cups, 2 Community Shields, and of course that 2012 Champions League, which is Chelsea's only Champions League in their history so far. And in that competition, he ended up scoring 6 goals in 8 matches, including the 88th minute equaliser in the final against Bayern. It was Bayern, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course the winning penalty. So he's just been a tremendous servant to Chelsea. So I just felt that he was the perfect choice for this debate.
Okay, and Labs, who've you picked?
So I've gone for someone a bit older because I think it's very easy to say somebody like Didier Drogba because he's more fresh in the memory in a period where Chelsea have been more dominant. But I've gone for a player who kind of came about just before the period of Chelsea's dominance and was their star player for a time, and that is Gianfranco Zola. And during his time at Chelsea, he was easily their best player during a period where Ruud Gullit was the manager, of course, and he did a number of things at Chelsea. He was the first and I believe still the only player to have won the Football Rights Association without having even played a full season in England. Sorry, Football Rights Association Player of the Year, not the actual association itself. Famous for a very good aerial backheeled goal, which people replay over and over again. He was described by Claudio Ranieri as a wizard, as magical. And he just had this presence on the pitch that inspired basically the entirety of the rest of his Chelsea teammates. And I think it was part of his influence that led to Chelsea playing quite an attractive style of football that might have attracted the likes of Roman Abramovich to take them over and turn them into the club they are today. So for all of those reasons and more that I'll go into when the debate actually starts, I'm picking Zola.
Okay, well, I'm going for Claude Makelele. And I think the Frenchman, as we've discussed in the past, is a player that you can't justify with stats. It's something you just have to watch. You have to watch the games that he plays in order to appreciate just how good he is. And I think one factor in particular that really puts him on a pedestal, in my opinion, is the fact that he is dubbed the pioneer of the CDM, the central defensive midfielder. So, and for one player, especially in the modern era, to redefine a position and for that position to then go worldwide, I think speaks incredible volumes. And also we've spoken about N'Golo Kante, who's sort of dubbed the new Makelele, if you like, filling the exact same position, playing the exact same role. And Makelele himself has said that Kante isn't quite up to his standard. So for Kante to have gone to Leicester in that position, be instrumental to win the title there, go to Chelsea, do exactly the same thing, and still not be as good as Makelele in his own words, I think that just, it says far more than I could possibly try to, with stats and goals and assists and whatever, not that he scored many goals. So that's why I'm going for Claude Makelele. So Chris, do you want to kick us off with the debate?
I certainly can. Well, it like I said, it sort of goes without saying about how much of a Chelsea legend that Drogba is. He was Mr. Chelsea in his first spell for pretty much the entire time he was there, which was a course of 8 years from 2004 to 2012, of course. And then he returned for the 14-15 season after he'd been at, I think it was Galatasaray, and
I think also Shanghai.
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
Shanghai,
he was one of the first to go to China, of course, back when it started to become a big thing.
A pioneer in his own right, much like Makelele.
Yeah, indeed. Then he returned for the 14-15 season, won the league and the League Cup, so obviously pretty decent impact there. Similarly, he won the League Cup and the league in his first season when he joined in 2004. He won the Golden Boot in 09-10, where he scored 29 goals, and Chelsea went on to win the first proper double of their history, so FA Cup and the league. He's also Chelsea's highest scoring foreign player in their entire history. So I feel like while you may not have to look at stats for Makelele to justify him being an incredible Chelsea player, I do look at the stats, and these stats do not lie about the impact that Drogba had at Chelsea.
Well, I think some of them definitely don't. I think winning the Golden Boot with 29 goals is obviously an incredibly impressive achievement, and winning trophies is obviously equally impressive. But saying things like he's, Chelsea's top scoring foreign player. Chelsea are not a club that, historically speaking, the Premier League are known for most of their club legends being anything other than English. When you immediately think of Chelsea legends, the first names that come into your head are English names, the likes of John Terry, who we already talked about, the likes of Frank Lampard. And obviously Drogba would be mentioned there as well. Obviously Sean Wright Phillips, of course. Jamal Blackman as well. But putting those aside, I don't think being necessarily the highest scoring foreign player at Chelsea in the Premier League era is necessarily too much of an achievement. And I think whilst it's definitely worth noting that Drogba won a lot of trophies, any average player can win trophies. So I think things like scoring the winning goals against Bayern and putting away the penalties are certainly impressive, but just saying that he won a lot of trophies could be down to any number of factors within the rest of the other 10 players in the team. And as for something Josh said about Claude Makelele, you said a lot of things about like not basing it off stats, basing it on what people have said and what Makelele himself has said about redefining CDM role and the fact that Kante wasn't as good as him. Whereas I don't think Makelele has actually said that. Makelele has in fact said he thinks that the Makelele role should now be renamed the Kante role. Which to me suggests that he has accepted that N'Golo Kante is perhaps arguably a better player in the same role that he is in than he was. But of course, that takes nothing away from the fact that he obviously did redefine the CDM role. I'm not taking that away. As for, instead of just, trying to mug you guys off, I probably should put forward a case for my own player a little bit. For me, the reason why Zola was so special was because in both Drogba and Makelele's times, there were other players whereby they could do that. If Makelele and Drogba had a bad game, there were other players in that team that could carry them, whereas Zola needed to be consistent. For the 7 years he was there, from 1996 to 2003, which is when Abramovich took over, he was the heartbeat of that team. He was their only real, quote-unquote, world-class player. And I think that I have his stats here somewhere. I think he scored 59 goals in 229 appearances, which is a goal every 4 games or so, alongside a number of assists and a number of excellent performances. And like I say, when we talk about stats and when we talk about people's opinions, the Football Rights Association is obviously a collection of opinions, and they gave him the award Player of the Year without him even having played, a season in the Premier League. So at a time where, world-class players were at a premium, especially for a club like Chelsea, I think Gianfranco Zola was really, really a talisman for them. All the players loved him. Every player's given glowing reports of him as both a man and a player. I think one player, I can't remember who, said that he was a small man in stature but a giant on the pitch. And I think that all those rolled into one make him an absolute legend for Chelsea Football Club.
Okay, well, I was going to come back on what you said, that Makelele didn't say that Kante wasn't as good as he was. Well, he did, because I've read and watched the interviews. That's by the by. What I will say is that I think, a bit like with a kind of bit what you said with Drogba, having other players that Chelsea could rely on if he were injured, for example. It's like, well, okay, maybe Zola not so much, but let's not forget, with Makelele having redefined the CDM position, he was, in a sense, the only player in the world that could fill that role, seeing as it was dubbed the Makelele position. Let's, just for argument's sake, say that Kante is better than he was. At that moment in time, he still was probably the only player that could fit every single criteria that was needed in order to be the heartbeat of the Chelsea team. Right in that sort of just in front of the defenders, behind the midfielders, behind Frank Lampard, who was a very good goal scorer. And I think a bit like what he did say about Drogba, that he doesn't, being the top foreign scorer, given the lack of Chelsea's history, isn't a massive achievement, although it is still an achievement, don't get me wrong. But I think for an impact that someone can have on redefining a role, and coincidentally or not, we can't ever say for sure, winning 2 leagues on the bounce amongst other domestic trophies, and potentially kind of like the Eric Cantona, not in terms of experience but in terms of impact, then be the driving force behind what Chelsea then went on to achieve after his departure. So I think it's impossible to rule out Makelele as one of Chelsea's all-time top foreign players, well, all-time Premier League top foreign players. And one last thing, as far as I'm concerned, to add, is that I think, as we've mentioned in the past, the central defensive midfielder role can often get neglected and can be unsung. But I think with Makelele, he almost became so unnoteworthy that he became in himself noteworthy. And I think that also speaks volumes for the impact he had at Chelsea.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point.
Not really much we could argue against
that last point's a very fair point, but I think that you mentioned just previously the impact that he had as a player on Chelsea's success winning those 2 back-to-back titles. And I'm not trying to say that Zola achieved anywhere near the same level of actual trophy success that Claude Makelele achieved, but I don't think anybody can deny that if you talk about the impact that one player had on a team, Zola had as much, if not potentially more, than Makelele, because, as I've mentioned, he was Chelsea's only real world-class player in that time. And if you talk about impact on the team, the player that is the reason for anything that team achieved. I think Chelsea might have achieved their first Champions League place whilst Zola was in the team. Don't quote me on that. That might be totally wrong.
Yeah,
I think it was in 2004.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And I think it would be fair to say that was in large part down to the likes of Zola. And for the Chelsea club that was there in 2001, that was a similar achievement to winning the league now. In fact, as a matter of fact, that was probably harder for them than winning the league would be for Chelsea now. So I think it's fair to say that Zola's impact on the Chelsea team whilst he was there was certainly matching, if not surpassing, of the role that either Drogba or Makelele played in terms of a singular player's impact on the team.
I would be inclined to think the same, actually, because, of course, you did mention about how Zola was there before the Abramovich era. In fact, he left in the same year that Abramovich bought the club. And then you have Makelele joining in the year that Abramovich bought it, and then Drogba joining the year after. So, of course, there's far more in terms of like visual success and like points tallies that can be, well, attached to both Makelele and Drogba if you just look at all the stuff that Drogba's won and what Makelele went on to spark with his pretty much his own position. And then, of course, you have Zola who's just there, happy to play in a side that, especially at that time, was not the best, because Chelsea are pretty much a club that has only existed since 2003. So yeah.
I think it's also quite hard to judge Zola's legacy in terms of what Chelsea went on to achieve afterwards because of the Russian Revolution, where players were coming in. So I think in terms of, it's quite hard to compare Zola with Makelele and Drogba from that point of view. It's almost like another team, if you like. It's almost like another football club in itself.
Absolutely. I won't deny that. If you talk in terms of legacy, I mean, Drogba scored a header to win Chelsea, and Drogba scored a header to take the Champions League final to extra time and then put away the winning penalty. Drogba, you could argue that Drogba in that final single-handedly won Chelsea a Champions League, which is huge for the club's history. Makelele, like I said, was the unsung hero for the early years of the quote-unquote Russian Revolution, where Chelsea won 2 back-to-back titles. And Zola, I mean, he got Chelsea to a Champions League spot in 2001. Great. I think he won 3 domestic trophies whilst he was at Chelsea as well in the 7 years he was there. But, I mean, when you get to 2003, is any player that played for Chelsea before 2003 really relevant in terms of Chelsea's legacy going forward? No, because the thing that's relevant is the money that Abramovich spent on a bunch of world-class players who he then basically bought the Premier League with. So in terms of legacy, I will fully concede that Zola arguably does not stand up to Makelele and Drogba in terms of what he did to drive the team forward, because everything he did that could have been relevant was made kind of irrelevant by the money that Abramovich brought in. But I guess my argument is almost totally centered around that point of the impact that he had on the team. So I can't really say too much more about him. That's basically my entire piece.
I think that's probably a good point to wrap up the episode. Thank you for tuning in to the brand new series of the Dugout Debate. We hope you like all the new look and the new features and the more streamlined timing. And don't forget to tune in again next week, where we'll be looking at some more big transfer stories. And until then, thanks for watching.
There you go.
Like, follow, and subscribe for more content from In the Dugout, your home of the beautiful game.